I handed the venue coordinator a printed copy of my own deposit receipt and watched her face change when she realized my fiancé had tried to book the same ballroom for a private celebration 2 weeks after our wedding date without telling me. Hey friends, please subscribe and turn on notifications, like this video, and leave a comment with your impressions. This will be a great help. Thank you. We never tire of reminding you. It's all thanks to you. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, and I was sitting in our apartment in Minneapolis watching the leaves start to turn outside our third-floor window. I'm 34, been working as a facilities manager for a medical supply company for the past 6 years. My fiancée Rachel was 29, a marketing coordinator for a regional brewery. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months, and the wedding was supposed to happen in April. That morning she came out of the bedroom wearing a dress I'd never seen before, dark green with a fitted waist, and heels that made her taller than usual. She was checking her phone every few seconds and had that distracted energy people get when they're anticipating something. I asked where she was headed so early. She barely looked up and said she had a breakfast meeting with a potential vendor for work. I nodded and went back to my coffee. She left 20 minutes later without kissing me goodbye, which wasn't completely unusual, but felt off given how dressed up she was. I had the day off and spent most of the morning catching up on paperwork for our upcoming move. We'd signed a lease on a 2-bedroom house in South Minneapolis starting November 1st, put down first and last month plus a security deposit, total of $4,800 split evenly between us. The landlord had emailed me the signed lease agreement the week before, and I'd saved it in a folder on my laptop along with receipts for the wedding venue deposit, the photographer's retainer, and the catering down payment. Around 11, Rachel texted me saying she'd be out most of the day handling errands and meeting up with an old friend for lunch. I told her no problem and asked if she needed anything. She sent back a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. I went to the gym, came home, did some meal prep, and she still wasn't back by 6 in the evening. When she finally walked in around 7:30, she looked flushed and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. She kicked off her heels and dropped onto the couch next to me, still glowing. I asked how her day was. She said it was really good, very productive. Then she picked up her phone again and started typing with a small smile on her face. I waited. After a few minutes, she set the phone down and turned to me with this careful expression, like she was about to deliver news she'd rehearsed. She said she'd run into her ex-boyfriend Trevor at a coffee shop during her lunch break. They'd dated for 2 years in college and stayed friends afterward, though I'd only met him once briefly at a group gathering about a year ago. She said it was so nice catching up with him, and they'd made plans to spend this coming Saturday together exploring some art galleries and grabbing dinner afterward because they had so much to talk about. I asked if I was joining. She tilted her head and gave me this patronizing little smile. She said no, this was something she needed to do on her own, just her and Trevor reconnecting as old friends. Then she added the line that flipped the switch in my head. She said Trevor always understood parts of her that I couldn't really grasp, and she needed that kind of emotional depth right now, so I should plan to make myself busy on Saturday, because she'd be gone all day and probably late into the evening. I sat there for a moment processing what I'd just heard. She was telling me, her fiancé, that she was spending an entire day with an ex-boyfriend who supposedly understood her better than I did, and I should just arrange my schedule around her plans. She wasn't asking. She was informing. And she delivered it with this condescending tone that made it clear she expected me to accept it without question. I felt something shift inside me, a clarity I hadn't experienced before. This wasn't about trust or insecurity. This was about respect, and she'd just made it obvious she didn't have any for me. I kept my face neutral and said okay, I'd make other plans. She looked surprised for a second, like she'd expected me to argue, then smiled and said she was glad I was being mature about it. She got up and went to take a shower. I sat on the couch listening to the water run and thinking about the $2,200 deposit I'd put down on the wedding venue 3 months ago. The contract had both our names on it, but I'd written the check from my account because Rachel's finances were tight at the time and she'd promised to pay me back her half before the final payment was due in January. I also thought about the $1,200 deposit for the photographer, which I'd paid in full, and the $800 retainer for the caterer. I opened my laptop and pulled up the venue contract. There was a clause about cancellations made more than 6 months before the event date, receiving a 75% refund of the deposit. We were still 7 months out from April. I drafted an email to the venue coordinator explaining that due to unforeseen circumstances I needed to cancel the reservation and request a refund per the contract terms. I didn't send it yet. I wanted to think it through. Then I opened my bank app and checked the account where I'd been setting aside money for the wedding. There was just over $9,000 in there, all of it mine. Over the next 2 days, Rachel was busy and distracted, constantly on her phone, smiling at messages I couldn't see. She mentioned Saturday's plans with Trevor twice more, each time with that same casual assumption that I was fine with it. I stayed calm and pleasant. On Thursday evening, I sent the cancellation email to the venue. On Friday morning, the coordinator called me, concerned, asking if everything was all right. I told her the wedding wasn't going to happen and confirmed I wanted to proceed with the cancellation. She said she'd process the refund within 10 business days and asked if Rachel knew. I said she would soon. I also called the photographer and the caterer. The photographer was willing to refund half the deposit as a courtesy since we were canceling well in advance. The caterer kept $200 as an administrative fee but returned the rest. Friday afternoon, I started packing. I went through the apartment methodically, taking only what was unquestionably mine: clothes, books, my guitar, my laptop and work files, my kitchen stuff that I'd brought into the relationship, my furniture from before we moved in together. Rachel had bought the couch and the dining table, so I left those. The TV we'd bought together, so I left it. I boxed everything up and labeled it. I called my buddy Eric and asked if I could crash at his place for a few weeks while I figured out my next move. He said absolutely. I contacted the landlord of the house we were supposed to move into in November and explained that my circumstances had changed and I needed to withdraw from the lease. I asked if there was any way to get my portion of the deposit back. He was understanding and said since the lease hadn't started yet he'd return my $2,400, but he'd have to keep Rachel's portion to cover his costs finding a new tenant. I said that was fair. Saturday morning, I loaded my car with the first batch of boxes. Rachel was still asleep. I made 3 trips between 9 and noon, moving everything to Eric's basement. I came back to the apartment one last time and left a note on the kitchen counter next to my key. The note said I'd canceled the wedding and withdrawn from the house lease. My portion of the deposits would be refunded to my account. She was responsible for her own portions and for the full rent at our current apartment starting next month since I was removing myself from that lease, as well effective immediately, and I wished her well. I didn't mention Trevor. I didn't need to. I texted the current apartment landlord and explained I was moving out due to a relationship ending and asked about the process for removing my name from the lease. He said since we were month to month at this point, I could give 30 days notice and pay my half of October rent, and I'd be clear. I sent him a check that afternoon. Then I drove to Eric's place and started unpacking. Rachel called me at 4 in the afternoon, right when she was probably supposed to be at dinner with Trevor. I didn't answer. She called again at 4:30, then 5, then 6. She left a voicemail that was just her saying my name in a confused voice and asking me to call her back. I didn't. At 7:15, she sent a text asking where I was and why I wasn't home. I replied with one line, "Check the counter." Then I muted her number. According to Eric, who I'd asked to drive past the apartment around 8, Rachel's car was back in the lot and the lights were on in our unit. My phone showed 11 missed calls by 9 p.m. At 9:30, someone buzzed Eric's apartment. He checked the camera, and it was Rachel. He didn't let her up. She stood outside for 10 minutes and then left. My phone showed a voicemail notification. I listened to it. She was crying, saying this was insane, demanding I talk to her, insisting we could work this out. She said I was overreacting and throwing away 3 years over nothing. The next morning, she sent a long text saying she couldn't believe I was being so dramatic, that her plans with Trevor were completely innocent, that I was being controlling and jealous and immature. She said she deserved to have friends and a life outside our relationship, and the fact that I was punishing her for that showed I'd never really trusted her. She said canceling the wedding was a cruel and extreme reaction, and I'd regret it. I read it twice and didn't respond. An hour later, she sent another message saying she'd talked to Trevor and decided not to see him anymore if it was going to cause this much trouble, so I could stop being ridiculous and come home. I typed out a response and read it 3 times before sending it. I said I wasn't coming home because I didn't have a home with her anymore. I said the issue wasn't whether she saw Trevor, it was the way she'd announced her plans, the dismissive way she'd treated my feelings, and the condescending implication that he understood her better than I did. I said those things told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed me and our relationship, and I wasn't interested in being with someone who saw me that way. I said the wedding was canceled, the deposits were being refunded, I'd removed myself from the house lease and the current apartment lease, and she needed to sort out her own living situation going forward. I told her not to contact me again. She called immediately. I declined it. She called from a different number an hour later. I declined that too. She sent an email to my work address Monday morning with the subject line, "Please read this." I deleted it without opening it. Her best friend Vanessa called me Tuesday afternoon and started in on a speech about how Rachel was devastated and I was being heartless. I let her finish and then said Rachel had made her choices and I'd made mine, and I didn't want to discuss it further. Vanessa said I was going to regret walking away from someone who loved me. I said if that was love, I'd rather be alone. I hung up. Wednesday evening, Rachel's mom called. That one surprised me. Her mother had always been kind to me, and I actually felt bad when I saw her name on my screen. I answered. She asked very gently what had happened. I gave her a brief, factual summary. Rachel had announced plans to spend a full day with her ex-boyfriend, made it clear I wasn't included and shouldn't expect to be, and spoken to me in a way that made it obvious she didn't respect me. I said I decided I couldn't marry someone who treated me like that, so I'd ended things and moved out. Her mom was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she was sorry it had ended this way, and she hoped I'd be happy. She didn't push. She didn't defend Rachel. That told me something. Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel tried 5 more times to reach me through various people and methods. A mutual friend forwarded me a message from her asking if I'd be willing to meet for coffee to talk. I told the friend no thank you and asked them not to pass along any more messages. She sent flowers to my office with a card that said, "I'm sorry, can we please fix this?" I thanked the delivery person and threw the flowers in the office break room with a note saying they were free for anyone who wanted them. She showed up at the gym I went to on Thursday evenings and tried to approach me in the parking lot. I got in my car and locked the doors. She stood outside my window saying she just wanted 5 minutes. I started the engine and she stepped back. I drove away. The refund from the venue came through in early October, $1,650 deposited back into my account. The photographer's refund arrived a few days later, $600. The caterer sent $300. The landlord for the house returned my $2,400. All told, I recovered just over $5,100 of the money I'd put toward our future together. I'd lost some, but I'd kept most of it, and more importantly, I'd kept my dignity. I started hearing things through the social network we'd shared. Trevor had apparently stopped responding to Rachel's messages after she told him she'd canceled their plans. Turns out he'd been going through a breakup himself and was looking for distraction and validation, not a renewed romance. When Rachel tried to rekindle things with him after I left, he'd made it clear he wasn't interested in anything serious. She'd misread the whole situation. The house lease she'd been planning to move into fell through because she couldn't afford it on her own, and the landlord wouldn't let her find a new co-signer this late in the process. She ended up staying in our old apartment at the higher rent, struggling to cover it solo. Her social media presence, which had been full of engagement photos and wedding planning content, went dark for several weeks and then reappeared with vague posts about personal growth and learning hard lessons. I moved out of Eric's basement in late October and into a 1-bedroom apartment in northeast Minneapolis, a neighborhood I'd always liked but never lived in. I kept going to work, kept going to the gym, started playing guitar again for the first time in a year. I called my parents and told them what had happened. They were supportive and said they'd had concerns about Rachel's maturity but hadn't wanted to interfere. I appreciated them telling me that, even after the fact. In mid-November, I was at a coffee shop in my new neighborhood on a Sunday morning, reading and drinking a latte, when I saw Rachel walk in with a woman I didn't recognize. Rachel looked tired, less put together than usual. She scanned the room, and her eyes landed on me. I watched her face cycle through surprise, something like hope, and then uncertainty. She said something to her friend and walked over to my table. She asked if she could sit for just a minute. I gestured to the chair across from me, but didn't say anything. She sat down and folded her hands on the table. She said she'd been thinking about me a lot and wanted to say she was sorry for how things had gone. She said she'd made a mistake, she'd taken me for granted, and she understood now why I'd left. She said she'd been doing a lot of reflecting and she realized she'd been trying to prove something to herself by connecting with Trevor, something about being desirable or independent, and she'd hurt me in the process. She asked if there was any chance we could start over, maybe just as friends at first, and see where it went. I looked at her for a moment. I didn't feel angry anymore, just done. I said I appreciated her apology and I was glad she was learning from the experience, but I wasn't interested in starting anything over. I said I'd moved on and I hoped she could do the same. She asked if I was seeing someone else. I said that wasn't relevant. She looked like she wanted to push, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She nodded slowly, said she understood, and stood up. She wished me well and walked back to her friend. They left a few minutes later. I finished my coffee and went home to my quiet apartment. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I just felt clear. I'd set a boundary, enforced it, and rebuilt my life on my own terms. That was enough. If you've ever had to walk away from someone who didn't respect you, drop a comment below and let me know how you handled it.